I think as a leader, if you have the ability, both as a leader as well as someone figuring out what this world looks like, what your next technology move is, whatever it is, if you have the ability to be curious and ask questions, I think you have the best starting point.
Welcome to Rise and Stride, where we empower you to take your next step in an ever-changing business landscape. Here's your host, Denise LeDuc-Froemming, President and CEO of the California Society of CPAs.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Rise and Stride. With me today is Pascal Finette, CEO and co-founder of Be Radical, a consulting firm that helps businesses with innovation strategy and implementation, leadership development, and business transformation. Over the past 30 years, Pascal has held leadership positions at various tech companies, including Google, eBay, and Mozilla. Served as faculty chair for entrepreneurship and open innovation at Singularity University, and spent time at early stage venture capital firm. Pascal also is co-founder of a nonprofit organization's Mentor for Good, which pairs business professionals with social entrepreneurs for mentorship and guidance, and the Women's Impact Alliance, which provides leadership development and coaching to young, emerging women leaders. Pascal, you are a very busy professional.
Denise, it's wonderful to be here today. Maybe. Luckily, we have AI to help us with that. I'm pretty sure we'll dig into that topic today.
We certainly will. And I'm just excited to be here with you. As I said before, I have been in the audience many times to hear you speak, and I learn something new every time. So I know you'll have a lot to share with our audience here and many tips for them. So again, thank you for being here and for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you again for inviting me, and let's dig into this.
Let's dig in. So the first question I have for you is, you have an extensive and varied background, tech startups, starting your own business, just talking to a lot of different business owners and innovators. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about how that path kind of emerged for you and how you started Be Radical.
Yeah, I think the short version is, and I love to tell this younger folks who are at the beginning of their careers, what looks in hindsight like a very carefully crafted resume. Let me just tell you, in the moment, it never made a lot of sense. In the moment, I was always very driven by curiosity, by desire to learn, by desire to be with smart people and trying to be the dumbest person in the room, because then your learning curve is the highest. So I stumbled into this whole world by, just by virtue of being in computers relatively early, which was a function of my dad basically buying me a home computer back in the day when that was a thing. I graduated during the first .com boom and started my first company during that boom because everybody around me was starting companies. And then I stumbled into just some of the more interesting tech companies in their formative years. I was at eBay in Europe in their very early days. I was part of the team which built Mozilla, the Firefox web browser. Spent a little bit of time at Google, and then in between I always did my own things. And so one thing really led always to the other, and it was always driven by curiosity and by this desire to learn. That also led me then to be part of the very early days of an organization called Singularity University, which is a think tank based out of Silicon Valley, really thinking about the future of technology and how it affects businesses, societies, individuals. I stayed there for a little while, and then maybe that's my entrepreneurial gene, which is when you're dissatisfied with something, you try to change it, and if you can't change it, you just do it yourself. And at Singularity University, there were a couple of things which Singularity University, for good reasons, didn't want to do. And, I tried to change it, couldn't do it. And again, for very good reasons, I understand that. And then started Be Radical about 5 years ago. And really what Be Radical does today is we're supporting companies, typically medium-sized to large-scale companies, privately held as well as publicly traded, all around the world, to better anticipate and prepare themselves for the future, and then to manage this weird morass that is innovation and disruption a little bit better. And in this function, we also years ago started working with the AICPA and SEMA, and had this wonderful relationship where we could dig deep into the profession and really think a little bit more about what does the future look like for the profession and in the profession, and what does it mean for firms inside of the profession.
Well, in your leadership, I have to say, has been just perfect. It's an inflection point. We'll talk about that too. But I mean, a sector that doesn't have an easy time changing all the time. It's difficult. People, too, I always say you need, when you're comfortable, get uncomfortable, because you can't stay comfortable. And you mentioned that too in your book, which I should say, Pascal just released his new book, Disrupt Disruption. And I do have it right here on my desk. I started reading, and it's a great read. So I would encourage all of you to go check it out.
Well, thank you for the plug. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's a great read. When you talk about tech and change is something that a lot of times people bristle at, and they're very uncomfortable. So what would be your recommendation on how do you feel comfortable and lean into the change that's out there? It's a loaded question.
It sure is. And make no mistake, nobody likes change, particularly if change is being done to them, be it your boss tells you have to change, and or like the market or the circumstances tell you have to change. So just acknowledging the fact that we as humans are like really not very comfortable with change. I think that's step number one. Step number two then really is to understand that unfortunately change is inevitable. It just happens. It's going to happen. We have a choice. We have a choice to play along and ride the waves of change, or being, sometimes drowned by the changes which happen to us. That being said, I think there's an interesting reframing you can do from a mindset's perspective to really look at uncertainty and ambiguity, which really is the predecessor to change, not as a threat, but as something which is exciting, as something which can become my colleague Jeffrey Rogers likes to talk about this idea around, it becomes a window into opportunities. So when I see uncertainty and say, instead of like, oh, this is uncomfortable, it's threatening to me or my business, but rather look at uncertainty and say, you know what, there's something here. There's an opportunity for us to grow. There's something which allows us to play. I think you can reframe it, and it becomes much more playful and becomes less scary, and does something we hopefully more willingly and more joyously engage. And for me, it all comes down to being curious about the world. If you're curious about the changes which are happening, if you're thinking about what's happening in the profession with AI, for example, automation, etc., I think it's exciting. I think for those of us who are willing to play, it's going to be a very exciting time where we will fulfill our customers' needs better, faster, cheaper for the customer. We can do more, and it becomes exciting.
It does. I think it's exciting too, but I have to say, not everyone probably shares not everyone likes change. So they like to be comfortable. And I think what you said about choice is so important, because you don't have to, right? Lean in. You can lean in, and you should lean in. So how do you help those other individuals that kind of are digging in their heels in your organization dig in and kind of look at those different business models?
I think for me personally, it has a lot to do with figuring out how can you try things out on a small scale so it doesn't become scary, right? I absolutely get it if you're sitting, in your office and you're thinking about a massive tech transformation, and it will cost you an enormous amount of money, regardless what that is in the context of your firm. It's scary, and it has huge risks attached to it. So I understand why you don't embark on this journey. But if you can find ways to try out these new technologies, these new ways of doing things, and just give you one example, at this year's DCPA, Digital CPA Conference in Las Vegas, we did a short exercise with nearly 2,000 people in the room, where we had people essentially think about first have a little bit of a conversation about what are potential use cases of generative AI, things like ChatGPT. And then the second one is we literally gave them 10 minutes and said, okay, now that you have a use case, figure out how you can use ChatGPT and do it. Just open ChatGPT, which, like the cheapest version of ChatGPT is actually free, and enter a prompt. And, for me, the aha moment was one of the tables worked on a prompt to create a cold sales email to a prospective client, and shared that the person who came up with that use case said, like, it's uncomfortable for me. I don't like to write these emails. I don't know how to write these emails. Like I spent hours thinking about this. And with the help of ChatGPT, by prompting ChatGPT to say, hey, help me write a cold sales email for the following context, ChatGPT within like 30 seconds basically wrote what sounded like a very good email. And I think a lot for me has to do with try those things out, see where you can find benefits. And then it's a little bit like step by step instead of these like massive step changes where you say, and now we're investing, hundreds of thousands of dollars into this new software, which I totally get is scary and risky.
No, I think the step by step is helpful. And we've been doing more pilots, to your point, and experiments to say, does it work? If not, let's abandon. And if it does, because we're likely going to have to tweak it, right? Because it's not going to be in the version it was, the MVP when you start. You're going to have to change it, right? So I think that's a really good point, because a lot of times we think we have to build the new iPhone or the new something, right?
Right.
We don't have
There's
to.
a beautiful example, by the way. There's a game which was devised by a designer years and years ago, where part of the game is you give a group of people dried spaghetti, a little bit of string, and a little bit of tape. And then you give them, under a time constraint, the task of building a spaghetti tower. So building the tallest tower out of those spaghettis. There's a TED Talk you can watch, which is phenomenal. And what they found is that what happens with executives across the board, if you give them this task, what they do is they spend about 8 minutes arguing about what's the best way to build this tower. They draw it out. They come up with like all kinds of like crazy ideas. And then they build the tower. When you give the same exercise to children, children don't argue at all about building the tower. They just build the tower. It collapses, of course. They build it again. They build it again and build it again. And the end result is that the tower which children build are on average 3 times as high as the towers which executives build. And it goes to show that there is so much value in trying things out and learning and incorporating those learnings quickly into new versions of whatever you want to try, instead of trying to think through the problem, which you often can't because these things are so, unknown, untangible, new. So again, my invitation for everybody is, when it comes to new things, again, I understand it's scary, but figure out how can you just like try something out quickly and incorporate those learnings. To your point about the pilots, right? Your tower will collapse, but eventually you will get to a tower which is way higher than anything you could have, designed on paper, unless you might be an architect, right? If you're an architect or a structural engineer, I give you the benefit of the doubt, but unless you aren't, like, I think it's much easier to try things out.
That's a great example. So everyone should get spaghetti, tape, and glue.
That's right.
Dried spaghetti and try it. I love that. Just really, it shows how important it is to not overthink it right from the beginning. So you mentioned ChatGPT, and we've all been talking about that, or Claude, or whatever, Bard, whatever it is, right? What is because you've been in the technology world for so long, you have such experience. What do you think about it all? Does it hallucinate? Is it going to take over mankind? I mean, kind of what's your projection, Pascal?
All of it, trust me. So I find it interesting. So I think there's a couple of things I believe we just need to understand as a starting point. First one is really important to understand when you look at generative AI. So systems like you just mentioned, ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, etc. They perceive the world just by the way they're built, not as a world where you distinguish between right or wrong, truth or not truth, binary, like right or wrong, but rather more or less likely. That's just the way these systems build. So if you think about where the hallucinations come from the fact that the system believes something is more likely, but in reality it isn't. So these systems are incredibly good at things which have to do, for example, with text. We know this, right? Like writing the email as the example I mentioned earlier. They're currently not very good when it comes to very binary decisions. So in theory, at least 2 + 2 math is really hard for these systems, because in math, there's only one way to solve for this. Whereas it's less, 4 is not more likely than 5. No, 4 is the answer, at least if you believe in basic arithmetic. So that's the starting point. The second piece is I've been doing tech for now 30 plus years. This truly feels like the fastest I've ever seen the tech space move. It's unbelievably how fast this moves. If you think about just ChatGPT just literally celebrated its first birthday. It was released on November 30th in 2022. And if you think just what we have achieved in this 1 year, the craziness which has been going on in this 1 year is just unfathomable. Extrapolate this out 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and you can imagine how crazy the world will be in which we're moving. And then the other thing which is happening is that we are starting to overcome, as we as technologists learn of the limitations of these systems. So one of them you mentioned, hallucinations. We start to learn how to build those systems to overcome those problems. Simple example, GPT-4, which is the paid-for version from ChatGPT, has a module called Code Inspector. And what it does is it allows you to upload an Excel spreadsheet or CSV data and then analyze the data by asking it questions about the data. It does this in really interesting ways. The first is it uses its capabilities as a generative AI model to understand what the data is about. So even if you have not perfectly labeled data, so say, for example, you have a profit and loss statement, for example, or you've got sales data from stores, it starts to understand what is each column actually about, even if it just has, like very little information about what the content of that column is. And then what it does is when you ask it a question about it, you can say, for example, tabulate this data, sales data, same store sales data, and compare the same store sales performance across different regions. What it then does is it takes this information, which it starts to understand because it uses its generative AI capabilities, and then uses its generative AI capabilities to write Python code, actual Python code, so computer code, to then calculate the end result. Because remember, these AIs are not good at actually doing math, but if it can generate Python code, which can then execute, it's math, it's actual code. So it's fascinating to see the creativity the technologists deploy to overcome those limitations, which I believe will leapfrog us in terms of what we can do with these systems. So that is all a very long-winded answer to say these systems are insane and incredible, and it will only get insaner as we're moving forward.
Yeah, the pace of change, like you said, it's just so quick.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Exponential, really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I was at Digital CPA. We did do the exercise too. It was a great exercise. You mentioned that the profession is at an inflection point. So maybe you can just provide a little more of your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think, and I made this point at Digital CPA. I think what's really important to understand is I'm actually less concerned about the narrative that AI will take our jobs in the profession and that the profession's at the end and soon you will just have an AI doing your taxes. I actually don't think that's true. And I've got some historical evidence to show that it's not true. So that's the good news. So the starting point for me is to really think about this idea that if you're thinking about the job to be done, Clayton Christensen, the guy who coined the term disruptive innovation, has this concept around jobs to be done. And what he points out is that people tend to not buy a product or a service because they want to own that product or service or use it. They have a underlying consumer need they want to fulfill. So simple example is you don't buy a power drill because you love the idea of owning a power drill. You buy a power drill because you've got a DIY project to do, like a picture to hang, like something to build, whatever it is. The same goes for if you think about the profession. As a consumer of the profession, I don't go to my CPA, in my case, for example, for my company, because I want to have a CPA, right? That's the thing I want. Like what I want is peace of mind. I want insight. I want to minimize my tax burden, whatever it is. The interesting insight is that these jobs to be done are insanely stable over long periods of time. They actually don't change. I guarantee you that in 20 years from now, people will still ask the question, how do I pay less taxes? This is not going away, right? Or how do I optimize my benefit strategy? Or, whatever it is. Or how do I sleep? Even something as simple as how do I sleep soundly at night, knowing that the IRS will not put me into jail because I broke like every single tax law there is. So that will not change. What will change and does change always is the way we do this. And if you think about the profession, the original spreadsheet, some people might remember this, used to be a piece of paper and a pencil. And then it became Excel. And in the future, now it's not even Excel. It's like, some bookkeeping software, something from Intuit or whatever company. And then in the future, this will be enhanced by AI. So I think that's number one. Number two is there's something called Jevons paradox, which goes back to an economist called Jevons, who used to live and operate in England during the times of the steam engine, so 1800s. And what he found is that back in the day in England, the fear was because of these steam engines, England made coal. We will run out of coal. There's only so much coal like the country has, and these steam engines will eat up the coal. And then the steam engine manufacturers said, don't worry, we make the steam engines more efficient. And thus the coal will last longer. And Jevons pointed out, rightfully, that that's actually not correct. Because yes, we make the steam engines more efficient, but when they become more efficient, they become cheaper to use. And when they become cheaper to use, we will use them more because we will find new use cases for them. And the very same, I believe, will be true for the profession. So we will not run out of use cases. And if my accountant or my accounting firm can deliver their services cheaper, better, faster to me, I will not just use the same amount and just use less of it, essentially. I will use more of it because now it's become so much easier for me to go to my accountant and say, hey, can you not just only help me optimize my tax strategy, but can you also look at this and this and this? And my accountant will say, of course I can, because now I have the abilities to do so. So I very fundamentally believe that for those of us who are embracing this change, there's actually really interesting opportunity to grow with our clients, to become much more of a trusted client advisor, to take over more parts, to answer more questions for our clients, to make their business better. That being said, if all you do is individual tax returns, at the end of the year, yes, you will need to do a lot more tax returns to make the same amount of money because they will be faster, quicker, easier, self-automated, all that kind of stuff. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, that speaks to, right, the new business models and what we're saying, moving from transactional to much more that strategic piece and the touch points and the way the world is going with ESG and AI. There's definitely more opportunities, but like you said, you have to have that bandwidth. So it's bringing that up to do that, much more analytical. I think it's more interesting work than the other work.
No, absolutely. I mean, honestly, so first of all, so I grew up in Germany, and I always thought the German tax system is the worst in the world because it's just like unbelievable amounts of paperwork. Then I moved to the United States, became a US citizen, started a company in the United States, and realized that Germany is actually really easy compared to what I mean, it blows my mind, and like everybody like who's listening to this, of course, will say, "Duh," but it blows my mind how much paper we produce, well, digital paper these days, just to do a tax return for my company, and my company is not a complicated company. So, all that being said, I very fundamentally believe that, I mean, filling out this paperwork can't be an exciting thing for an accountant to do. Like it cannot, right? And you want to have machines do that stuff. Why would you, right? But having my accountant sit on my side and say, "Hey, Pascal, proactively, right, throughout the year, start to consult with me," like calling me up saying like, "Hey, listen, like here's an opportunity for you." I mean, that's exciting for me, and it should be exciting for the profession.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a speaker I talked to who said accounting was her love language. And the reason being is she found the accountant, they interviewed her to help her free her up. She hated doing it. And she said it was a stress on her relationship too. So she found the right accountant to help her, and they freed up her time and made her life so much easier. But to what you were saying, it's because they changed her life.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So accounting could be your love language. You never know. You never know. So maybe we can shift gears and move into more of your philanthropic efforts and the two organizations that you started, Mentor for Good and Women's Impact Alliance. Just maybe tell us a little bit about those. I looked online. It looks fabulous. Just the connections you make and the impact. So maybe you can just tell us what led you to start those and how, what you're doing to make the impact.
Yes, absolutely. So, full disclosure, I founded both of these organizations with my wife, and particularly in the case of the Women's Impact Alliance, it's really her baby, and I'm just the IT and tech guy. But that being said, I think they stem both from the same idea, which is I found in my life having mentors and having mentors early in my career is truly like trajectory changing, life changing. Having people who have been in your shoes, having made the mistakes, telling you what to look out for, but really also helping you just find this out for yourself and not just like, don't do this and then, you don't do it, but rather understand why. It's just incredibly helpful. So we started Mentor for Good as a way for us to give back to the startup community. And particularly what we found is there's a lot of programs for startups, without a doubt, to the point that CPA.com, for example, runs a startup accelerator, which is amazing. What we found is that startups which are in the impact space, so organizations which are, nonprofits or organizations which serve the public sector, for example, there's much less of that available to them, simply because often these companies are not designed for financial growth, et cetera, right? So there's a lot of infrastructure which doesn't exist for them. So this is the reason why we started Mentor for Good. The Women Impact Alliance really started out of both Jane and I, my wife, had the insane opportunity to receive a very, very high-end executive coaching program, which was a year-long process when we were both at Mozilla. And it changed us. It changed us as individuals. It changed us in terms of our careers and where we were in life and where we wanted to go. And very similarly, we found that typically people get access to executive coaching rather late in their career, right? It's a classic, you're the VP at a large consumer goods company, publicly traded, you're in your mid-40s, and suddenly you get executive coaching, which is great, make no mistake. We believe that if you give someone executive coaching much earlier in their career, 25 to 35, the hypothesis is, and we now know this to be true from the work we're doing, is that the effect is much higher, even higher. And again, very similar to what we found with Mentor for Good was that we really wanted to focus on a particular demographic we felt would benefit more from this and has probably less access to it, which in the case of the Women Impact Alliance is really young women in the impact space. Reason why we picked young women. So impact space is just because that's our passion. So nonprofits, governmental organizations, for-profits which do something in this space. And the reason why we focused on women is there's crazy statistics which show you that something like 80% of nonprofits are run by women, which doesn't surprise me too much if you're thinking about just, women tend to be a little bit more caring, etc. And yet we don't support them, right? Like we, as a sector, I think we give them philanthropic funds, but we don't actually help them with capacity building. And that's what we wanted to do with the Women Impact Alliance. And that organization is now in I think its 10th year, might have just flipped into the 11th year. It has seen nearly 2,000 women all around the world have gone through this program, anything from human rights lawyers in the Sierra Leone to women doing reproductive health work in India, to a woman who works directly with a minister, minister being in the public sector, not spiritual, in Iceland, to anything and everything, and absolutely incredible human beings in this program.
Oh, it sounds like you're just doing such extraordinary work, in both these spaces.
It's very fulfilling. It's very fulfilling.
I would think so. And just what you said about the executive coaching, when you think about it, you don't get it till you're at that level where you could have used it 10, 20 years prior to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what happens with executive coaching, I think my wife likes to talk about this idea that I do believe that, very fundamentally believe that we will build better organizations, more caring organizations, and thus have a larger impact on the world at large if we get individuals to really be more mindful and to be ultimately a little bit more enlightened about their own powers, and remove some of those barriers which we have in our heads as to what we can or should do. So that's what we're trying to do with the coaching work.
That feeds right into my next question. So I always like to ask, how you define a leader, because you just said, that, I don't know, more mindful, intentional leader. So what other qualities would you say are so important today? Because I think it's changed from 10 years ago to today.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we talk a lot about leadership and what are the qualities of leadership these days. As a matter of fact, we have a whole bunch of research. We're thinking about writing actually a second book on this. But the qualities we find in leaders today, there's a whole bunch of stuff you typically see in leadership programs, servant leadership, empathetic leadership, etc. And I think these are all really, really important. But there's another layer to that, which goes towards, as a leader, first of all, your ability to lead, and this goes full circle to what we talked about at the very beginning, your ability to lead into and in the unknown. So the idea that, how do you actually lead a team, an organization, customers, into a world where your answer about the future is, I don't know. Right? I mean, if someone comes to you, it's like, honestly, if someone comes to you and says, like, so what will AI look like for the profession in 5 years? I don't think anyone, even the most advanced technologists, can give you a clear answer to that. It's impossible, right? So you just sit there and say, I don't know. I directionally, I've got an idea, but I don't know, right? So it requires, I think, an interesting humbleness on the side of the leader, because you got your promotions and you got your grade A in school for having the right answer. Now it's all about being able to come up with better questions. So I think that's, one really important aspect. The second one is really this idea that once you understand that, you also understand that as a leader, your role truly is only to hire the right people and empower them to do the thing they need to do. And I think there's a third component to that is, as a leader, together with your team, I believe it's really about figuring out where an organization needs to go directionally. So we talk a lot about this shift from the old world had this idea around getting the strategy right. I mean, I've been part of efforts where we did the 5-year plan, which, by the way, I don't think it ever worked, but that's a whole different story. But the idea was, you write that 5-year plan and then you execute linearly against that plan, right? Like step by step. The new world, the world we're living in today is really, I think, is you need to get the direction right. You need to know where your North Star is. You need to clearly have a goal in mind. Otherwise, you're just like aimlessly wandering the desert. But you get the direction right. And then you create the systems. And again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier about experimentation and learning, etc. But then you get the systems right so that you can embark on something. A friend of mine once called this on the drunken walk of the entrepreneur. So this idea that, right? It's not a straight walk. It's kind of like, like you sway left and right a little bit as the world seemingly is shifting below you. But I think that's what leadership looks like today. It's a very different form of leadership. It's much less clear.
It is different. And I see that too. I feel it. I feel the difference, right? Honestly, before COVID, when I used to say, like, so I did a servant leadership program 15 years ago, probably. When I did it, people were looking at me like, servant, odd. But I thought, well, that's who I am. So I don't know. But now today, everybody talks about it. But then it just was thought of as, oh, you're doing that. It sounds odd to me. So I do. Yeah, it does resonate with me what you're saying, and the ability to be humble and to ask questions and not know the answer, which is so hard.
Absolutely. And again, like, think about it. It's like, pretty much everybody I know, the reason why they're in the position they're in today is because they got a grade A in school, they got a good degree from the university, and they got promoted. And every single time that happened, it was because they were rewarded for having the right answer. And
so true.
Right? That's just not true anymore. It's just, in most cases, there is no right answer anymore.
There isn't. No, you're right. It's so what would be your 1 or 2 tips that you would say to our audience? They're going into this world that's changing. They have to step up, lean in. I like the drunken walk. What would you say would give them a tip or two of how they can show up and make an impact?
For me, I mentioned this earlier, but for me, it really comes down to, I think, the core skill we need to reconnect. It's a skill we all have from literally since we were babies, and then it just gets a little bit beaten out of us through the system, is really around curiosity. I think as a leader, if you have the ability, both as a leader as well as someone figuring out what this world looks like, what your next technology move is, whatever it is, if you have the ability to be curious and ask questions, I think you have the best starting point. If you can sit down and say, I don't know, tell me, tell me what's going on for you, like what is important to you. Even if you go to a client and just a question of like, what do you actually want to achieve? Like the Toyota has the Toyota production system, the 5 whys famously, like this whole idea of like, if I ask why 5 times, I get to truly the essence of what the problem is, I think we need to embrace that a lot more in this world we're in. And then we need to have the ability, the systems for us in place, as well as just the mental capacity to try it. It goes back to your point, to try these things out, right? To like run little pilots, learn from them, iterate quickly, understand that the world is very, the way we move forward is literally one step after the other.
Mm-hmm. In everything you said, Pascal, I feel like embracing a child's mindset, because I've heard, the whys, and so many times you say to your children, why do you ask me 5 times or 10, right? And then when you said too, just with the spaghetti, that experiment, the collaborating, right? And not arguing. So there's something there. And every time I listen to you, I learn something new.
Thank you.
Every time. So I could just talk for hours. We don't have hours, and you don't either. But it's just such a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and really enjoyed this conversation. And I believe, these are, just to like finish on this thought, is like, these are really exciting times if you let them to be exciting and not be afraid of them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would say to help you to embrace the excitement, I would read Pascal's book, and I'm going to plug it again, Disrupt Disruption. It says how to decode the future, disrupt your industry, and transform your business. So it's a really good read, not difficult. So pick it up. Also go to Pascal's site, Be Radical. I've been on there, learned a lot. I love to learn different things, and it'll help you embrace the change that's out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rise and Stride is produced by the California Society of Certified Public Accountants. To learn more, visit calcpa.org.